win this weak resolution, and I count on your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stadler, for 1 minute.
President, this Parliament and most of the speakers in this Parliament act as if the Russian citizens are children. That isn't the case. Russians know very well who they want to elect and who not, and they wanted stability. That was borne out with lots of talks that I had with Russian citizens on the street. And that's what I heard from the citizens themselves. Stability. They don't want to return to the times they had under the Jelzin government. I was an election observer. I met only one other member. That was Mrs. Gardini from the EPP group. And I myself went to a province 1,200 kilometers from Moscow. There were election observers of Mr. Sjuganow in particular, Mr. Schirinowski and Mr. Prochorow. There were commissions, there were transparent sealed ballot boxes. There were webcams there so that at home you could observe the elections yourself. All the claims about the election in Russia is not true based on my experience. I wouldn't like to say anything about the Duma election, but I saw the presidential elections myself, and it isn't true what's being said here.
Thank you. Will you accept blue card? Okay, Mr. Migalski.
Thank you very much. I fully agree that Russians are not small children. I'm fully convinced that most Russians are wiser than you are. I'm convinced of that. My question is as follows. Do you know how the media market functions in Russia? How many free broadcasting stations there are in Russia? Thank you.
Colleague, this media market isn't much different than the Austrian one. We had a state monopoly up to 10 years ago in Austria, and nobody said in this Parliament anything about Austria because of that. We had reporting in state TV, which was almost all about the government. So I know all about that. It's denigrating that nothing, whatever that isn't in line with the mainstream of this House is dismissed as nonsense, as Mr. Brok said and Mrs. Morgantini. I saw the things myself, and I can't be persuaded otherwise because I saw it myself. President, colleague Swoboda, 2 questions to you. You said the election in Russia wasn't fair or free. There's a contradiction that your own party comrade, who was an electoral observer in Russia, as I was, said in a press conference the election was surprisingly free and surprisingly fair. Second question, you criticised that in the election campaign there was indirect campaigning in the television. How do you explain the amount of coverage given to your government in your own country?
Keep the time.
Colleagues, as we see, there are different assessments. I'd just like to point out, it's not about our sensitivity whether we recognise the election or not. There's a chance now to take a reform process forward. And if the opposition in Russia says we want to reform, we say you mustn't because that's the wrong system, then that wouldn't be election. Let's not be holier than the Pope. Let's help the election, the opposition in Russia. That's the key point. Of course, we can express much more criticism, but the question is, how can we help and make sure that the two sides come together? Because that's our main interest. If we want to have a partner in Russia, we want to have a partner which is strong and democratic. That is my objective. It's not about the past, it's about the future. And that's what the opposition wants too. To Mr. Stadler, there's nothing new in this chamber. It's not about Austria today, it's about Russia. You might not have noticed that. It's about Europe and Russia. That's the key point. And next time, I hope that we can speak about really free elections. They weren't this time, but let's help them, the opposition, with Medvedev to find a solution. We won't be able to change Putin, but we'll be able to change the rules under which Putin can rule, and the opposition can do that with our support.
Thank you very much, Mr. Short.
Kollege Brok,
Colleague Brok, I'd like to ask you if, together with your colleague Gardini, spoke with her, who met observers in this presidential election and said at a press conference that this election was free and fair.
Answer, Mr. Brok.
Well, I don't know that statement, but if that's a statement that's been made, then I can denounce that as nonsense because, you know, nobody has a monopoly over nonsense in the political parties. Now, Mr. Schulz, we'll see what forms of reform will be adopted, and we'll be able to draw lessons from that. I think, first of all, it's important that the conditions be put in place so that there can be a state under the rule of law. Now, the issue of parties being more easily accepted and signatures recognised, there need to be fewer signatures required. It has to be necessary that media freedom thrives so that opposition parties have better chances. These are some of the conditions which are necessary to see further democratic developments in Russia. And I think the rather weak conclusion of that is that we need to take one step after the other. Let's not try and run before we can walk.
For your answer. And